Welcome to the Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore. It is Monday, August the 31st, 2020.
Yesterday's events began with hundreds of cars filled with supporters of the president, rallying in Clackamas County and then driving through downtown Portland. They were supported and energized by the president himself. President Trump, for 4 years, we've had to live with you and your racist attacks on Black people. We learned early about your sexist attitudes towards women. We've had to endure clips of you mocking a disabled man.
That was Mayor Ted Wheeler of Portland, Oregon, yesterday afternoon, talking directly to Portland, to the country, and to Donald Trump. On this episode, a key portion of that particular speech during a press conference from Mayor Wheeler, and looking at the state of the country, and we are now 64 days away from the November 3rd presidential election. That and one or two more items next. Welcome back. I hope you were well on this Monday, and we are, of course, in the midst of a lot of chaos in this country, which is exactly what Donald Trump had wanted. And he said 6 years ago that this was what he wanted. Quote, "When the country goes to total hell, then you'll have riots to go back to where we used to be when we were great." That was Donald Trump in 2014 on Fox and Friends. I've played that audio, actually, of that very quote to you in an episode several months ago. No need to play it again. I think it's pretty clear that everyone now can see that Donald Trump is criminal, violent, racist, and someone who lacks any sense of humanity or morality whatsoever. I think that is very obvious to everybody. The question really is, at this point, are you with the violence and the immorality and the inhumanity? Or are you with the country and love and peace and justice and the pursuit of justice to make this country a place where everybody has justice? Are you involved on that side of the ledger? Because if you are, then there's only one person to vote for, and that's Joe Biden. And what we have to do when voting for him is to cast that vote and continue to push him and continue to demand from him after the election. Obviously, if he's been voted into office at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, we have that responsibility to keep pushing Joe Biden. We have the responsibility to continue to advocate for the issues that we need to have addressed. We need to address these issues, and we are addressing them in the streets with our peaceful protest. I condemn violence, I will say that now, no matter who it's coming from. I will say that now. And in a few moments' time, you will hear from the mayor of Portland, Ted Wheeler, from his press conference, a portion of his statement at his press conference yesterday. I condemn violence from anyone, no matter who it is. And that's something that Donald Trump can't bring himself to say. That's something that the Republicans can't bring themselves to say. And they also won't bring themselves to say this, that this violence is being orchestrated not only at the behest of Donald Trump, but it is also being orchestrated at the behest of Vladimir Putin and Russia. I have, in numerous episodes, referred to a New York Times article from March the 10th, 2020. And the article is very simple and in plain language. I mean, it's a language that anybody can understand. And that language could not be clearer. It just simply could not be clearer. The headline from the New York Times, March the 10th, 2020, written by Julian Barnes and Adam Goldman. Russia trying to stoke U.S. racial tensions before election, officials say. Russian intelligence services are trying to incite violence by white supremacist groups to sow chaos in the United States, American intelligence officials said. I'm just going to read this small portion of that article, which, if you like, you can read. I will provide a link to it. And it begins, Dateline, Washington. This is March the 10th, 2020. The Russian government has stepped up efforts to inflame racial tensions in the United States as part of its bid to influence November's presidential election. You know what else that is? That is a form of voter suppression. That is a form of voter suppression through fear and intimidation. And that's something that very few people, if any, are saying, certainly not on television. That is what this is. This is another form of terrorism because it's clearly terrorist. And we've got ISIS members running around here in this country. And those ISIS members are these white, racist, violent males. Let's make that clear. That the only ISIS that we have, at least in the Western Hemisphere, are white, male, violent racists. That is the ISIS that we've had here in America for well over 400 years. And that is the issue we've got to confront and address. And that is the issue that people have to get real about in this country. Because these folks now are desperate. As is Donald Trump. He's desperate. He's scared. He's cornered. And when an animal is desperate, scared, and cornered, this is what that animal does. They've already taken off the hoods. The sheets are there. The sheets are the Trump flags. And they are being paid, in my view. This is organized. This is probably on Facebook, and Facebook needs to do a whole lot more than it's doing. They failed last week in Kenosha. They admitted that they failed. This is organized and orchestrated, and it's designed to intimidate, and it's being done in cities that are run by Democratic mayors. It's obvious what's going on here, folks. It's a campaign of hate and violence. It's a campaign of fear, and it's a campaign of chaos. And it is being done to intimidate you. It's being done specifically to intimidate people who might vote Democratic. That is what this is about. That's what this is about. This is a form of voter suppression. And I think we need to confront that and be real about it. And the truth is that this is all being done to make you even more anxious than you may already be. You know what my message is in response to all of this? Vote. But specifically, vote early. Vote like you have never voted before in your life. 40 states in this country, 40 states, 40, have early voting, which will begin next month, literally, in a few days or in another week or so. And I will be doing roll call on these states. Very soon I will have a guide for every state with all the links that you need in your state. So I want to let you know that if you listen to this podcast, and if you listen to it on a daily basis, but no matter what, if you listen to this podcast, certainly over these next 64 days, what you will be getting from me is official information from every one of the secretaries of state in the United States. All of this information will be updated and accurate, and all of it is coming directly from the official Secretary of State websites. This must be our focus now. Our focus now is to vote, is to make sure that we educate others, check in on people we know, make sure that we talk to young people and listen to them. They are going to be a very important constituency, and we must have a large voter turnout, a massive voter turnout, the biggest voter turnout in the history of this country. And we must also have that amongst the youth. And Joe Biden will coast in this election if the youth vote is out in abundance. And while I think that Joe Biden certainly has to do a whole lot more with the youth, and he certainly has to do more to get Latinx voters involved. Ben Jealous was on CNN last night talking about this, how Joe Biden is being currently outspent 10-1 in key markets in this country by Trump when it comes to Latinx voters. And that 40% of Latinx voters at the moment are supporting Donald Trump. That is way too high a number. That number needs to be in the low 30s or high 20s. And I think it really has to be in the low 30s. So Joe Biden and his campaign have to work on that. I've got lots of work to do on that. And we need to keep pushing him to do that kind of work. Because Donald Trump has his base sewn up. You have seen what his base is. You've seen who they are. You've seen it over these last 3.5 years. His base, of course, are Nazis and Klan. His base is David Duke. His base is violent white men who have been committing these mass terrorist shootings and killings. That's his base. He has done everything to genuflect to them, and he is now encouraging them in violence. He's leading the charge. Joe Biden has to consolidate his base and not take them for granted. So that's the challenge for Joe Biden. Our challenge is to vote, is to check our registration before we vote, is to make sure we are registered to vote. And that must be done now. Register to vote. Do not wait. Yes, there's the fear. Yes, there's the anxiety, and it's understandable. But what is also understandable is that we can do something about those things. We can do something about being confused. We can do something about being afraid. We can do something about being anxious. And that is to vote. That is to get educated. And I hope that I can be, at least for you, one source of providing that education, a source of providing that education about every state and what its practices are. So whichever state you live in this country, if you live here in the United States, you can be rest assured that the information that I am providing for you is directly from these websites. And I will be quoting them. I've done that in the past. And I will be sending out a list soon of every single state with official information that you need. Spread the word. Contact your friends and family. Speak to young people if you can. We all can do something. If you can donate, do that. If you can phone bank, do that. If you want to get involved with an organization that deals with elections and election protection or helping to register people or to educate people, do that. There's plenty of them out there. Plenty of them. We all can do something. If you want to be a poll worker, and I really do recommend that young people do that, then please sign up now in your state to be a poll worker. There are links on various Secretary of State websites about being a poll worker. So, amidst all of the violence and the pain, we can show love, education, decency, and a desire, and we must vote, and we must have the largest voter turnout in the history of this country. And I think the best way to ensure that is to vote early. Last Tuesday, August the 25th, 2020, 2 men were shot and killed in Kenosha, Wisconsin during those early morning hours or late hours of the previous day, whether it was Monday of last week or Tuesday of last week. 2 young men were killed in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Kyle Rittenhouse, the terrorist, ended their lives in a callous, cowardly, and brutally violent way. Joseph Rosenbaum and Anthony Huber were 2 people who died trying to prevent violence. 2 people who died for something that they believed in, and that was that Black Lives Matter, that justice matters, and that justice for all is the principle that must be adhered to and must be implemented. I want to send my deepest condolences to the family members of Joseph Rosenbaum and Anthony Huber. May both Joseph Rosenbaum and Anthony Huber rest in power, and may their memories forever be a blessing.
The violence in the streets is certainly not coming from protesters and not even entirely from police officers. It's from the mind of the person in the Oval Office himself. And this kind of influence on violence is actually far more pervasive than the most overt kinds of violence. In fact, I've studied this my entire career. My area of expertise is in violence prevention. And we find that the more hidden forms of violence are actually the most, are the deadliest and the most worrisome. And so one person hitting another is not as dangerous as someone of greater influence stoking violence, inciting it, and then creating a culture of violence, I would say, is the most dangerous kind of all. And so many people in Kenosha have expressed that they do not want the president there, and I would agree with that he will be fueling the divisions and creating greater danger.
That was the voice of forensic psychiatrist Dr. Bandy Lee. She wrote a book entitled The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. Dr. Bandy Lee was on the Thom Hartmann program today. By the way, you should support progressive media. If you are fed up of all the noise and all the pundits and all the commentary and the slanted, or not even the slanted, but just the coverage that just doesn't really broaden itself beyond the same story every single 2 minutes or every minute, and with no other variation. And if you want a perspective that is a bit broader and more progressive, then I would really urge you to check out progressive media. Thom Hartmann is one of those voices on freespeech.org, as is Randy Rhodes, as is Amy Goodman from Democracy Now! At democracynow.org. There's also Roland Martin at rolandsmartin.com, or Roland Martin Unfiltered. That is a show that is on for around 2 hours daily, Monday through Friday. You can get that show online, whether it's YouTube, whether it is on Instagram or Twitter or other platforms. Roland Martin, 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern, Monday through Friday, here in the U.S. and around the world online. So I would recommend that program as well. Roland Martin is one of the very best. News from a black perspective, and a lot of coverage of stories that you will not see on CNN or MSNBC, and certainly not on Fox. And then finally, I also would ask you to tune in to two other people. One of them is Karen Hunter on Sirius XM, channel 126 on the Urban View. She is on the air at 3 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Eastern as well, on the radio, on the airwaves, online, on the Sirius XM app. And in the mornings from Monday to Friday, you've got Joe Madison, the Black Eagle. He too is on Sirius XM, channel 126, part of the Urban View. And he is on from Monday to Friday from 6 a.m. Eastern Time. And that's 3 a.m. Pacific to 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 7 a.m. Pacific. Monday through Friday. Joe Madison, the Black Eagle, a top-notch broadcaster. And you can find him on Sirius XM, on the app, on the radio. I recommend those voices, all of those voices. Progressive media is very important in this country, as 95+% of all the media is owned by conservative or right-wing organizations and corporations. On Saturday night in Portland, Oregon, over the weekend, J. Bishop was killed. J. Bishop was someone who didn't have to die. A senseless killing. Bishop was someone who believed in the right-wing cause. He had a hat on, I believe, called Patriot Prayer. It's an organization that supports conservatives and right-wingers and free speech, and believes in free speech, particularly, certainly for conservatives and for the right wing. I don't care whether this person was a Trump supporter or whether he wasn't, and all signs point to that he was. A life taken is a life taken. And that young man should still be alive, just like both Mr. Rosenbaum and Mr. Huber should both be alive today. As I said at the beginning of this broadcast, life taken by anybody must be condemned, and I obviously condemn it. I condemn the violence from everybody who does it. Everybody. And I send my deepest condolences and prayers to the family of J. Bishop. Yesterday in Portland, Oregon, Mayor Ted Wheeler, a Democratic mayor, in response to the tragic events of the night before, held a press conference, much of which, or almost all of which, was aired live on CNN and on CTV in Canada and on a number of networks, not just locally in Portland, Oregon, but all around the country. And he wasted no time after calling, of course, for a de-escalation and after condemning the violence of the night before that took the life of J. Bishop, and of stressing the importance of violent groups like the groups of Trump supporters that came into Portland to really try to escalate violence and to commit violence and to provoke violence, which they obviously were successful in doing, to stay home and stay away from Portland, Oregon. Portland, by the way, has had a long history of, like many, many, many U.S. cities, of Klan activity and white racist groups who behave in a violent way and have committed terrorist attacks. So that's a backdrop that you may not have heard in the corporate news media here in the U.S. Portland, if you go and just look this up yourself online, you can do the appropriate searches and find that Portland, Oregon has long been a bastion for racist groups. Portland, Oregon has long had that history. Now, some of these groups were recruiting, or at least were going and coordinating these events. The Proud Boys and all these other racist groups of violent white men who were in Portland, and some groups had been orchestrating these events on the West Coast, and we saw here in San Francisco, actually, just yesterday, there was a demonstration, protest march across the Golden Gate Bridge. People with these flags, Trump flags. You saw this in Studio City, I believe. You saw this in Woodland Hills, both of which are in Southern California. So there is an organized movement now of these violent racist people. And quite frankly, this is all orchestrated. It's all orchestrated on Facebook. It's all orchestrated by conservative groups and rich families who are supporting a lot of this, I think, who are financing this, I think. Don't have the evidence, but it's well organized. Well organized. Everybody has the same large flag with Trump's name on it. just like they did in Michigan back in the spring, in March and April. And you know what happened there, where they stormed, really just invaded the state capitol in Lansing, Michigan, and made death threats to the governor of Michigan, Gretchen Whitmer. And of course, as you saw, some really ugly, wretched things were said about her, and death threats. And I'm not going to go into the graphic nature of them. And of course, a lot of these people were carrying swastikas on top of that, and nooses and Confederate battle flags. So back to Mayor Wheeler in Portland, Oregon. Yesterday, at his press conference, opened with a statement. And what you're about to hear are roughly 2 minutes or so, 2+ minutes from that statement that Mayor Wheeler made. Please pay close attention to this.
Yesterday's events began with hundreds of cars filled with supporters of the president rallying in Clackamas County and then driving through downtown Portland. They were supported and energized by the president himself. President Trump, for 4 years, we've had to live with you and your racist attacks on Black people. We learned early about your sexist attitudes towards women. We've had to endure clips of you mocking a disabled man. We've had to listen to your anti-democratic attacks on journalists. We've read your tweets slamming private citizens to the point of receiving death threats. And we've listened to your attacks on immigrants. We've listened to you label Mexicans rapists. We've heard you say that John McCain wasn't a hero because he was a prisoner of war. And now you're attacking Democratic mayors and the very institutions of democracy that have served this nation well since its founding. Do you seriously wonder, Mr. President, why this is the first time in decades that America has seen this level of violence? It's you who have created the hate and the division. It's you who have not found a way to say the names of Black people killed by police officers, even as people in law enforcement have. And it's you who claimed that white supremacists are good people. Your campaign of fear is as anti-democratic as anything you've done to create hate and vitriol in our beautiful country. You've tried to divide us more than any other figure in modern history. And now you want me to stop the violence that you helped create. What America needs is for you to be stopped so that we can come back together as one America, while recognizing that we must demand that all people, Black, brown, white, every color, from every political persuasion, pull together and hold all people accountable in stopping racism and violence. And we together are peaceful again under new leadership that reflects who we really are, we the people of this great nation. President Trump, you bring no peace. You bring no respect to our democracy.
That was Mayor Ted Wheeler of Portland saying what I think needed to be said. It is the first time that I have heard a public official, a politician, be as blunt as that. And maybe that may not have sounded very blunt to you. But I am happy that Mayor Ted Wheeler said that. It needed to be said. And while others have written about it and have talked about it perhaps on talk shows, for a mayor of a city to directly confront Donald Trump and tell him over the airwaves that he is the one that is being violent or creating the violence or cheerleading it and instigating it is something that needs to be said. And more public officials, more politicians need to join Mayor Wheeler and publicly say these things, whether at press conferences or in the news, whatever. Say these things out loud. because I think it's very clear we are all aware of what's going on now. Everybody can see, as I said earlier. It's just a question of which side are you on? And for those of us who are supporting Joe Biden, we have to engage in a massive turnout, whether it's via mail or in person, early voting or early voting by mail. We need a massive turnout. That is what has got to happen here. April Ryan is a White House correspondent. She has been in the White House press briefing room as a reporter now for 23 plus years. She has covered at least 4 American presidents. She has written numerous books, including Under Fire, a book that came out a couple of years ago now. And it is a book that I highly recommend. She can be found on Twitter at April, as in the month, D as in Delta, Ryan, common spelling, on Twitter. That is her Twitter handle. April Ryan is a reporter at the White House for American Urban Radio Networks. She was on CNN as part of a panel yesterday with Ana Cabrera, and this is part of what she said.
April Ryan, let me start with you. I want your reaction first to what we're seeing in Portland and what we heard from the mayor.
Anna, let's call a thing a thing. This president, Donald John Trump, has instigated a race war in America. Portland, Oregon is ground zero. This president, Donald John Trump, has basically stoked the flames for racist extremists, neo-Nazis, and the alt-right. And they're even defending, this president is even defending Kyle Rittenhouse, the 17-year-old who went in Wisconsin and killed 2 protesters. So at the end of the day, the mayor of Portland is absolutely right. And there are those who are calling for help from this president in the stoking of a race war. There is a race war in America right now because of this president. People are calling me asking if there indeed is a way to get the International Crimes Court to come in to deal with this. You know, I've talked to some people who are in intelligence, and they're saying he's done heinous things, but they have to see. We don't know for sure. But people are now afraid of this president because he has stoked the racial flames. And let's call the thing a thing. He has now begun a race war in America in 2020.
I agree with April Ryan. I think April Ryan is 100% spot on. Donald Trump has been doing this throughout Twitter for the better part of nearly 10 years now. Whether it is questioning Obama, oh, is he born here in the United States? Whether it is saying things about Kamala Harris, whether it is saying things about Ilhan Omar and any other black woman, whether he's saying things about Muslims and this Muslim travel ban, whether he's saying racist things, of course, about Mexicans that he said from the very start of his campaign run in 2015, June the 16th, 2015. Yeah, I remember the exact date. He launched his campaign by going down that escalator in Trump Tower in New York City. Whether it is so many other examples, it is very clear that from retweeting some racist talking about white power, whether it is retweeting things about so-called great patriots, when he's saying great patriot, when these people in Portland are shooting paintball guns and firing things at crowds in Portland. Whether it is his genuflection to Nazis, whether it is the symbols that he has for his campaign this year compared to the symbol of the Third Reich, whether it is his saying that there are very good people on both sides in Charlotte, whether it is him talking about shithole countries and pointing to places like Honduras and parts of the African continent and parts of Haiti or other places, whether it is him saying things like there's rat infested, these communities are infested in Baltimore. I mean, that's just a slither of the things that he has said. And these build up in people's minds. And then he talks about liberating on Twitter in the last few months, April and May of this year, April in particular, liberate Michigan, liberate Minnesota, liberate Virginia. That's what he tweeted. And all of those states, if I'm not mistaken, all have Democratic governors. And if they don't, certainly the most prominent cities in those states have Democratic mayors. This is all about violence and stoking up violence in Democratic cities. None of these cities are cities in which there are large bases of Republican voters, at least to the best of my knowledge. These are all predominantly Democratic voting cities or towns. And certainly if they are not predominantly Democratic voting cities and towns, they are Democratic mayor-run towns. Portland has a Democratic mayor. Kenosha has a Democratic mayor. And this is what this guy's doing. And he wants to come to Kenosha tomorrow. He said he's going to, Donald Trump did. That he's coming to Kenosha tomorrow, a week after 2 people were killed there by this Trump supporter, terrorist, Kyle Rittenhouse. Anthony Huber and Joseph Grossman are no longer here. And we will see if Donald Trump says anything about their lives being taken. He was able to say something about the right-wing activist who was killed, Jay Bishop. But he was not able to say a word about Jacob Blake. He never paid tribute to Jacob Blake at all. Jacob Blake is still with us, fortunately, but he's paralyzed from the waist down. And did Donald Trump ever say anything about that? He was asked at a rally in New Hampshire where he stumbled last Friday. Up the steps, he staggered and stumbled. And I believe it was at that rally afterwards or before, I don't know, whichever it was, but at that event, he was asked about Jacob Blake. And he said, well, it looks pretty, it doesn't look like a good sight to see. Nobody wants to see that. Nobody liked to see that. And of course, what he really means when he says nobody liked to see that is what he means when he says that. When Donald Trump says that, what he's saying is, yes, we like to see that. That's the messaging. He projects, he says the opposite of what he means a lot of times, and he lies like a rug. So when he's telling you that it was not a good sight to see, he means the opposite. And when he said a lot of people would agree with that, what he really means is a lot of people agree with me that it was good to see a young black man being shot in the back 7 times. You know how this guy speaks. And as to April Ryan's point, as to her point, I think there is a race war going on in this country. It's been openly talked about for months and years, even before Donald Trump got into office. You heard some guy, Jeffress, this guy Robert Jeffress down in the South, some pastor in quotes talking about there's going to be a civil war in this country. I mean, he was on Fox or something just a few months ago saying this. There's going to be a civil war in this country. I do think that there is the stoking of this as racist terrorists, these white terrorist men, whether they're burning down police precincts in Minneapolis, whether they are ramming their cars into the protesters all over the country. They've been doing this in Los Angeles, in Minneapolis, and up in Seattle. You remember what happened to Summer Taylor? Summer Taylor was killed. I mean, there were so many different people, and that was a young black driver, apparently. But the point is that these events are being inspired by people who either support Donald Trump or are just lawless people, and there's really no difference. Why are you having caravans of Trump supporters coming in to Democratic cities only? Because they want to start something, and it's part of a reality TV show campaign. It's about creating spectacle. It is no different from the RNC last week. The bigger, more colorful, more loud, more bombastic, and outrageous, the better. That's the psychology of all of this. So I say once again, as I think I said yesterday, do not fall for the okie doke of Donald Trump. Do not be one of his stage puppets. The orchestration of violence is clear and it's organized. Do not fall for this, because I think a lot of this is being orchestrated both by the Trump supporters and anybody who supposedly is a Black Lives Matter protester who's doing this. You know, all these events, whether the shooting done by the killing of Jay Bishop, that was done by a white man who he is being talked about in various publications as a Black Lives Matter supporter. Why is it that all of these white men are doing this? I have not heard of any black people in the Black Lives Matter movement doing any of these violent acts. It is all it's 99% white men. It really is. The FBI has talked about this many times. And again, I think April Ryan is correct. There is this ginning up of violence, and it starts at the White House. It starts with a candidate who failed to disavow David Duke on a million occasions. And then when he finally did it, the tone was, I disavow, I disavow, I disavow. And that tone was, oh my goodness, do I really have to? Okay, damn it, I disavow. That's the other piece of what was not spoken that preceded those words, right? He's backed into a corner and he has to, okay, I disavow. That was the way he, quote unquote, disavowed David Duke. So I think April Ryan is 100% on here. You may agree, you may disagree. But I do know one thing. And I think that this is something that everybody knows. We all must go out and vote. Let's make that happen. Vote early. Tell your friends. Tell your family to do the same. Make sure you're registered to vote now. Make sure they are registered to vote now. Check your voter registration. And vote early. Thank you very much for listening. Joe Biden will be speaking, and by the time you hear this, will have made his speech today about Donald Trump's violent America. And that will be one part of tomorrow's podcast episode. Thank you again for listening to this edition of The Politicrat. I'm Omar Moore.